Good morning, guys. Welcome back to Morgan Hill Farm. So it's going to be a nice cloudy day here in South Carolina. I am going to try today to at least get some of my tomatoes planted in the ground. We're actually starting to get pretty warm. And in just a few days, I think we're supposed to hit 90 degrees. So that's getting really hot, and that's okay because I would much rather be hot than be cold. But if you can find a cloudy day in the forecast, that is the best time to transplant your things out into the garden. And then on top of that, I need to get a bunch of stuff direct sown, like my cucumber, summer squash, things like that. I have been watching that 10-day forecast, and so I do feel like the nighttime temps are staying pretty warm. And so it looks like over the next week or so, I've got a lot of work ahead of me. But that is not why I came on today to talk to you guys. I've actually been thinking about this for a little while, and I wanted to share it because, I don't know, it just really got me thinking. So about a week ago, guys, I had this dream, okay? And tell me what you think, because I think that this is absolutely crazy. First thing I'm going to tell you is that it was absolutely crystal clear. You know, sometimes like you have dreams and you try to remember them in the morning and they're fuzzy and you just can't quite piece them together. This was not that dream. I remember every single detail as I went through that day, just doing school with the kids and, you know, the housework and the garden stuff. I just couldn't get it out of my head. But anyways, it starts with Nate and I, and we're on this overpass, so you know, sort of like over a highway, and we're on foot. We're not in a car, but the minivan, you know, it's parked just before the overpass there, just on the side of the road, so it's not too far from where we're standing. And we're looking at this on-ramp, and we're looking at the highway, and first, there's absolutely no cars, no people, nothing, just silence. And then the on-ramp and the highway, they were completely covered in ice. And I'm talking like a thick sheet of ice. It wasn't like, I don't know, a little frost or some patchy snow or something like that. Just completely covered in ice. But the overpass where we were standing, that was perfectly fine. So no ice at all, completely normal. And it wasn't even winter because he and I were in t-shirts and I remember the sun shining and that it was warm. But anyways, Nate thinks that he's going to be able to drive on this to get us where we need to go. And the whole time I'm telling him, no, you know, there's no way. And he's not listening. So anyways, we get into the van. We start to go down that on-ramp. And within like 30 feet, we just end up sliding off the side. And now we're in the ditch and we're stuck. Okay, and then the dream shifts. You know how dreams kind of like do that, like 1 second you're here and then the next you're somewhere completely different. Okay, so now it's summertime and I'm at the farmer's market or an outdoor produce market, I guess. And it's just me there shopping. And there's a ton of merchants and farmers, you know, whatever, all trying to sell these vegetables, their fruit. The tables are full of just this beautiful food. But I am the only customer there. And I see this basket with zucchini. And so I pick one up, I hand it to the guy behind the table, and he says $10. And I kind of laugh, like, $10, really? You know, like I'm giving him an opportunity to tell me that he's joking. And he just looks at me completely serious and says, yes. And the look in his eyes, guys, I remember it like it was real. And that's where the dream ended. And I just remember sitting there that morning, you know, like with those two images in my head. So first the icy road and then that $10 zucchini. And I didn't really try to analyze anything that morning. I just, you know, kind of thought about it throughout the day. But man, the next day it just kept coming back to me. And that's when I really started to think about it. Because how can you not, right? When something just keeps, you know, kind of staying in your head. And after sitting with this for a couple of days, guys, I have come to really just one conclusion. Okay, so if we start with the icy roads, you know, on the on-ramp and the highway that's just completely impassable, the fact that no one is there in a place that should be full of cars. And don't forget that where Nate and I are standing on that overpass, it's completely and perfectly fine. No, there's no ice. The weather was warm and it was sunny. And it was like, as long as we stayed in that area where we were supposed to be, we were fine. But the moment that we wanted to travel somewhere a little further, we couldn't even make it 30 feet. There was no possible way to drive on that ice. And the fact that the ice shouldn't have even been there in that season because it wasn't winter. I'm imagining, I mean, it had to be spring or summertime with how warm it was. But it stopped us from being able to drive on the highway, which when you think about it is what you're using to get somewhere when you need to go a little further away. We could drive in town, we could stay on those local roads, it seemed like. But now all of a sudden, we weren't allowed to go any further than that. And I just started thinking about how much our lives depend on that movement, right? Like you're driving to work, you're driving the kids to school every day. Maybe you're gonna decide to go on a vacation this summer and you're gonna drive there on a highway. You can go wherever you want on a highway. You can go across the entire United States. But when you restrict that movement, I just kind of feel like that was a picture of how you would control a population. And there's lots of ways to keep people off the road. You know, ice is one of them, but you know what else is? An energy crisis, fuel shortages, regulations on where and when you can drive and how far you can go, you know, based on your license plate or registration numbers. And we have a lot of countries that are doing that exact thing right now. Now here in America, you know, we're not quite seeing that. But we always hear about emissions. We always hear about gas-powered cars and how they want to limit that. And so I don't know. I don't think that it's that far off to say that an energy crisis or an energy policy could or maybe would be used to control movement. Because when people can't use the highway, you know, when you have to stay on those local roads, wouldn't that be a lot easier to control? And then when you go to the produce part of the dream, right, where that one zucchini was $10. And it's not like there was a shortage. There were baskets full of every imaginable vegetable and fruit on those tables. And I just really think that it was interesting that it was a zucchini that was $10. Because they cost what? Maybe $1, you know, off season. But they are one of the easiest vegetables to grow. The thing that, you know, your neighbors secretly are leaving on your front porch because they grow too much of them and they don't know what to do with them and they just can't get rid of them. And the fact that the man, you know, when he told me $10, just that seriousness in his eyes, and no one else was there buying anything. And I wasn't gonna buy that $10 zucchini. And I honestly believe that that farmer's market, that was showing me a famine, because there's two ways to have a famine. Okay, the first, which is kind of what we always think about, which is when the food just isn't there. But the second is that it's so expensive that you can't afford to buy it. So both of those scenarios are going to leave you, you know, with an empty stomach. And just to give you a picture of that, do you guys remember what happened in Beirut just a couple of years ago? They had an entire warehouse that exploded, and it destroyed their country's main grain storage. And within 2 years, guys, the price of their food had gone up something like 1,500%, and they had 85% of their population that couldn't afford the most basic of food. And the worst part was that the food was there. You know, it was on the shelves of the grocery store. You could see it. You just couldn't afford it. And you know, and from that, guys, I'm going to say, do me a favor tonight. Go and read Revelation chapter 6, verse 6, where it talks about the black horseman. And it talks about a quart of wheat being a denarius, or 3 quarts of barley being a denarius. And you know, a denarius, that's what a Roman worker made in one day. So it took them an entire day to buy food just for them to survive for that one day, for one person. And if you bought the barley, which was the cheaper grain, you maybe had enough to provide one meal for a very small family. And then that verse ends with something really interesting that says, don't harm the oil and the wine. So like those luxury goods, those, you know, the things that the wealthy consume, for some reason, those things are fine and they're protected. And I just kind of feel like, you know, the Bible has been telling us this for 2,000 years, you know, a time, you know, where food's going to become so scarce that a day's labor will barely buy you enough to eat. And when you look at what's happening all over the world with food prices, the supply chain, fertilizer, water, the fact that all of our farmland is being bought up by foreign governments and billionaires, it doesn't sound that far-fetched. And guys, I wanted to share this with you today because I really feel like this is telling us that something's coming, and that it's coming sooner than what we imagined, and that we need to be ready when it does. This isn't complicated. It doesn't have to be crazy. I'm not telling you to go build a bunker or go live in the woods, although I think that, you know, both of those options sound very appealing. But I just don't think that that is that's not really an option for most of us. But I am telling you that I do think that you should go to the store this week and that you should buy an extra bag of rice and beans, some canned goods, things that have those long shelf lives, and buy a little more than what you need each week. And if it's a grain or a rice, you need to be storing it in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. And you just need to be consistent, starting now if you haven't started already, because by the time that people realize what's happening, by the time that the roads are icy and they're charging you $10 for a simple zucchini, it's going to be too late, guys. And I'm not saying that everything's going to fall apart tomorrow, because this stuff does take time. But the money to buy all that extra food, it takes time to earn it, and to learn skills, and to grow a garden, and learn how to preserve, and how to cook with those basic staples again. It takes time, because we live in a culture where dinner is 3 minutes in the microwave, right? Most people have no idea how to bake a simple loaf of bread, or even to make homemade marinara sauce. And we just live in an era where there's such abundance and ease that, we don't know how to do this stuff anymore. We've forgotten that the food on the grocery store shelves isn't guaranteed to be there. And most people really have no idea how fragile that supply chain really is. You get one bad growing season, a weather event, a fuel crisis, or even just decisions being made by people, in a room that you and I will never be in. Okay, all of those are really simple things that can put us in a position where we're standing at that farmer's market holding a piece of food and being told that it is astronomically expensive. So guys, I hope that you are going to start doing what you need to do if you haven't already, that you're getting prepared, you have extra food, extra supplies. At the end of the day, I don't know if this stream was just my imagination, or I don't know if it's, actually telling me something, but I can tell you that it is the first stream in a long time that I've had that actually applies to this type of scenario, And so if I were you, I would be grabbing the food on the grocery store shelf while it's still there, Think about growing a garden, a container garden. I've got these vertical green stalks. They're going to be having their Mother's Day sale really soon. So if you even just have a balcony in an apartment, you can grow in that, guys. So you need to start doing these things now. But anyways, guys, let me know what you think. Because I really couldn't come up with any other explanation than that. And I feel like that explanation, that I really was able to come to it fairly quickly. And I mean, I don't know. Tell me what you guys think, because I'm interested to know. But anyways, guys, I've got a lot of work ahead of me today. So we're going to cut this off. But thank you so much for hanging out with me. I will see you in the next video.